She found it on the second examination. There, on the inside of the cuff, a small repair. Someone had closed the seam with a different thread, a rust-colored thread. Edris set the glove on the table. Her hands went still on either side of it. She had bought that thread 7 years ago. She remembered the exact Thursday. She had left it in the small blue tin on the workroom windowsill because she had no project in mind. She had never noticed when it disappeared. She had never thought to ask. A stray cat had been bringing this glove to her porch every single Tuesday for weeks. And now she understood why it felt like something more than a found object. It had been repaired, carefully, without a thimble, in the way of someone competent with their hands, but not with a needle, with thread from her own home. She was not ready for what that meant, but it was already true. If you want to know what the cat was really trying to tell her, stay with us. This is Paws and Whispers. The first Tuesday it happened, Edris Holden thought nothing of it. She had come downstairs just after 6 in the morning, wrapped in the old cardigan she kept on the hook by the stairs, the one with the loose button on the left cuff that she had been meaning to replace for 2 years. The kettle was already on, a habit so deeply worn into her mornings that she sometimes could not remember walking into the kitchen at all. She simply arrived there, mug in hand, listening to the thin whistle that meant the water was ready. It was the cold that made her glance toward the front door. A draft moved along the floor, thin and persistent, carrying with it the sharp smell of October, of dead leaves pressed flat against wet pavement, of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. Sycamore Ridge was like that in autumn. It smelled of something ending, though not unhappily. It smelled the way an old book smells when you open it after years on a shelf, familiar and a little sad and oddly comforting all at once. She set her mug on the side table and opened the front door. On the top step of her porch sat a glove. It was not hers. She could see that immediately. The leather was dark and creased along the knuckles, the kind of wear that comes not from age alone, but from use, from hands that gripped handles and lifted weight and worked without ceremony. The fingertips were almost black. There was a small tear along the thumb, poorly mended with thread that did not quite match. She looked up and down the street. The road was empty. A flag hung limp on the garrety house across the way. 2 sparrows moved along the gutter at the far end of the block, poking at nothing in particular. There was no one in sight. She picked up the glove. It was heavier than it looked, stiff with cold. When she turned it over, she found a trace of dried earth along the palm. Garden soil, or something like it. She held it for a moment, then set it on the porch railing and went back inside to her tea. By noon, she had nearly forgotten it. It was her neighbor, Maribel Croft, who brought it up first, leaning over the low fence between their yards 3 days later, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Maribel was somewhere in her early 40s, compact and quick in her movements, with dark hair she kept in a braid and an expression that was always slightly ahead of whatever she was saying, as though she had already worked out the next 4 steps in a conversation. "Did you see the cat?" Maribel asked. Edris looked up from the dry stems she was cutting back along the front bed. "What cat?" "The grey one. I have been watching him for a few days now. He comes from the direction of the old barbery on Clement Street, cuts through the Harmon Yard, and ends up on your block." Maribel paused. "I saw him on your steps Tuesday morning. He had something in his mouth." Edris straightened up slowly, the way her knees required now. "A glove," she said. Maribel nodded. No, that would be the one." They looked at each other for a moment. "Probably found it in someone's yard," Edris said. "Probably," Maribel agreed, though neither of them sounded entirely convinced. The cat came back the following Tuesday. This time, Edris was watching. She had told herself she was not, that she had simply happened to be near the front window at that hour, that the light through the glass was good for reading, but the book stayed closed in her lap, and her eyes stayed on the street. He came just as Maribel had described, grey, with darker markings along his back and a white patch beneath his chin that was visible even from a distance. He was not small, but he moved carefully, close to the ground, as though he was accustomed to going unnoticed. He carried the glove in his mouth with a kind of deliberateness that was unusual, not playing with it, not tossing it the way cats toss found objects, but carrying it forward with what could only be described as intention. He climbed her steps without hesitation, set the glove on the top step, exactly where it had been the week before. Then he sat. He did not meow, did not look around. He simply sat and looked at the door. Edris didn't open it, but she watched him for a long time. He stayed for nearly 20 minutes before rising, stretching once in that liquid way cats have, and disappearing back the way he had come. He left the glove where it was. That evening, Edris picked it up and turned it over in her hands by the kitchen light. It was the same glove. She was certain of that. She recognized the tear on the thumb, but it seemed more worn now, as though it had been used again since she last held it. There was fresh soil on the palm, a faint smell of damp wood. She put it in the kitchen drawer under the dish towels and told herself that was the end of it. It was not. Maribel Croft had a habit of paying attention. It was something that had served her well in the years she had worked at the veterinary clinic on Farrow Road, where she spent her Tuesday and Thursday mornings assisting with intake and sometimes simply talking to frightened animals in a low, even voice while they waited to be seen. She had learned to read the signs that most people missed. The ear held at a slightly unusual angle, the way a tail moved or did not move. The specific quality of stillness that meant something was wrong, rather than simply calm. She had noticed those things in the grey cat almost immediately. Most strays, when they found a route that worked, were opportunistic about it. They adjusted, they paused when something was different, doubled back when a gate was closed, investigated new smells with that slow, cautious interest that cats brought to almost everything. But this one moved the way a person moves through a familiar house in the dark, without hesitation, without needing to look. He knew the path. Maribel began following him on the third week, rising before 6 and waiting at the corner where Clement Street met the alley that ran behind the old barbery. She wore her heaviest coat and carried coffee in a thermos and tried not to feel foolish, which was not always easy. He came at 6:14. She followed him from a distance of about 40 feet, which was as close as she dared. He did not seem to notice her, or if he did not care. He moved through the Harmon yard, passed along the side of the old Prescott place, and cut through a gap in the fence near the water meter that she would not have found on her own. He moved with such steady purpose that she found herself walking faster, simply to keep up with an animal that was not hurrying at all. When he reached Edris Holden's porch, Maribel stopped at the end of the block and watched. The glove was already in his mouth. She had not seen him pick it up, which meant he had collected it somewhere along the route, probably from a spot she had not identified yet. He climbed the steps. He set the glove down. He sat. Maribel watched the front window of Edris's house. The way the curtain moved slightly. She knew Edris was watching. She had come to know the shape of Edris's mornings over the years. The light in the kitchen coming on at 5:30. The front curtain always drawn back exactly halfway before 7. There were patterns to people, just as there were patterns to animals, if you cared to look. The cat waited, then left. Maribel stayed where she was for another few minutes, thinking. The following week, she traced the route back from the gap in the Prescott fence, moving in the opposite direction toward the source. The path led her through the yard behind the post office, across a narrow strip of gravel that backed onto the cemetery service road, and finally to the edge of a vacant lot beside the old Grace Fellowship Church, closed for years, used now mainly for storage. On the lot stood a wooden outbuilding, old enough that the grey paint had given way entirely to bare and weathered silver. The door was held shut by a simple latch. Beside the door, in a hollow between two roots of an overgrown elm, sat the glove. The other glove. Maribel crouched down and looked at it without touching it. It was the left hand's match to what the cat had been bringing to Edris's porch. Same leather, same degree of wear. She could see the dark staining on the fingertips, the careful repair near the cuff, with thread of a slightly different shade. She stood up slowly and looked at the outbuilding for a long moment. The wood smelled of rust and old dampness. Light came through the gaps between the boards in thin, dusty lines. She did not go in, but she made a note of the address. That afternoon, she mentioned the church lot to Edris over the fence. Edris's expression did not change immediately. She kept her eyes on the row of dried lavender she was bundling, her fingers moving without pausing. Then, after a moment that lasted slightly too long, she said, "I know the lot." "I thought you might," Maribel said quietly. Neither of them said anything more about it that day, but when Maribel walked home, she glanced back at Edris's front porch. The glove was gone from the railing, and the kitchen light, which should have been off by then, was still burning in the window. Edris had put the glove in the kitchen drawer. Then she had moved it to the box on the closet shelf, the one with the rubber band around it that she never opened. Then, on an afternoon when the rain came in sideways and there was nothing to do and nowhere particular to look, she had taken it out again and sat with it at the kitchen table. The light in November was thin and flat, the kind that made everything look like an old photograph. She held the glove under the overhead lamp and turned it slowly. The leather was soft in some places and stiff in others, worn along the creases the way leather gets when it has been on the same hands through many seasons. She found the mend on the second examination. On the inside of the cuff, near the wrist seam, there was a small repair. The original stitching had come loose, leaving a gap of perhaps an inch, and someone had closed it with a different thread, a rust-colored thread that stood out clearly against the pale interior lining. The stitch was uneven, done without a thimble probably, done in poor light or in a hurry, the kind of stitch made by someone who was competent with their hands, but not with a needle. Edris set the glove on the table. Her own hands rested on either side of it, very still. The rust-colored thread. She had purchased it on a Thursday in March 7 years ago. She remembered because she had gone to the fabric store on Birch Avenue specifically for buttons, and had come home with buttons and also with that thread and a pack of needles she had not needed, and a length of ribbon she couldn't now explain. She had left the thread in the small blue tin on the windowsill of the workroom because she had no project in mind, and it seemed like the kind of thread a person keeps without a reason. She had not noticed when it disappeared from the tin. She had not thought to ask. The workroom, the gloves, the path through the old Prescott yard, all of it was connecting now, and she was not certain she was ready for it to connect. She put the glove back in the box and replaced the rubber band. On Tuesday morning, she told herself that if the cat came, she would simply not answer the door. He came at 6:19. She heard the small sound of something being set on the step, then silence. She stood in the hallway and looked at the door and did not move. He waited. She could feel it somehow, the quality of his waiting, the way it had a specific weight to it that was different from the weight of an empty porch. After 23 minutes by the hallway clock, the sound of departure. Paws on wood, light as breath. She opened the door and looked at the glove on the step. Dirtier than last week, carrying that particular smell of dark soil and damp wood that she had come to recognize without being able to explain why it was familiar. She left it there, but she stood on the porch for a long time in the cold, looking down the street where he had gone, and she did not go back inside until her hands had gone numb. The following Saturday, Maribel knocked on the door with a container of soup and an air of carefully maintained casualness. She came inside, set the soup on the counter, accepted a cup of tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. For a while they talked about the festival committee and the weather forecast and the way the Garrity family had let the elm in their front yard go too long without trimming. Then Maribel said, "The outbuilding on the Grace Fellowship lot, there are things stored in there. Pans, old cloth, a folding table. Someone used that space, not recently, but regularly at some point. The things inside are arranged, not just left." "People put things in empty buildings," Edris said. "Yes," Maribel agreed. "They do." The tea cooled between them. His name was Glenn, Edris said after a while. Maribel did not say anything. She simply stayed where she was and listened. He used that lot for years. He grew things there mostly. In the summer, squash and tomatoes. He said the light was good on that side. Edris looked out the window at the grey yard. He never liked the word garden. He called it the lot. He said garden sounded like something people showed off. She was quiet for a moment. He died 3 years ago, in January. It was very quick. Maribel put her hand briefly over Edris's on the table, then withdrew it. The gloves were his, Edris said. He wore them every time he went over there. He must have left one, and the cat must have found it somehow and understood, or not understood exactly, but she paused, and something that was not quite a laugh and not quite its opposite moved through her expression. I don't know what that animal understands. I only know he keeps coming. He does, Maribel said. They sat together until the light outside went flat, and the houses across the street became soft shapes in the dusk. Neither of them spoke much more that evening, but it was the most comfortable silence Edris had sat in for a very long time. December came in cold and certain. Edris had not decorated yet. She told herself she was waiting for the right day, for a morning that felt like the appropriate moment. But the right day kept not arriving, and the box of lights stayed on the closet shelf, and the front porch remained bare. Caligo continued coming. He came on the 4th Tuesday of November and the 1st and 2nd Tuesdays of December, steady as the frost, as regular and reliable as the hallway clock. He came with the glove. He set it on the step. He waited. He left. Edris took the glove inside each time now. She no longer put it in the drawer or the box. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it while she drank her morning tea, and then put it back near the door before the next Tuesday, so that it would be there if he came to collect it. She did not fully understand why she did this. It simply felt like the right thing, the way some gestures feel right before you have the words to explain them. Torrin Vale, who lived 3 houses down and served on the neighborhood council, had taken a different view of the cat. He had called the animal control office twice, citing the ordinance about unregistered strays, and had spoken to Edris directly about hygiene concerns. He was not an unkind man. He was simply a man who preferred things orderly, and a grey cat conducting a weekly ritual on a neighbor's porch did not fit into any category he recognized. It was Maribel who had shown him the glove. Not Edris's glove, the one from the outbuilding, the left-hand one. She had brought it to the neighborhood festival planning meeting and set it on the table with a quietness that stopped the conversation. Torrin Vale had gone still. He had reached out and touched the edge of the cuff, then pulled his hand back. He had looked at Maribel and then at the other people at the table and then back at the glove. Glenn Holden used to lend me his tools, Torrin said finally. When I was first on the street, he had everything, pipe wrench, tile cutter. I never had to buy half of what I needed because Glenn always had it and always said yes. He paused. I never returned his good trowel. I always meant to. No one said anything. I didn't know he kept a place at the church lot, Torrin said. He did, Maribel said simply. After that, Torrin Vale stopped calling animal control. On the 2nd Tuesday of December, when the frost was heavier than usual and the porch step was wet with it, Caligo came as he always did. But this time, he slipped. The step was slicker than he expected. His front paws went out from under him as he climbed, and the glove dropped from his mouth and skidded sideways, stopping short of the spot where he always placed it. He recovered his footing quickly, as cats do, with that composed efficiency that makes their stumbles look almost intentional. But he stood looking at the glove, and then at the door, and then back at the glove. He could not seem to correct it. He stayed on the step for a long time, longer than usual. His tail moved once, slowly. The white patch under his chin was very visible in the grey morning light. From inside the house, Edris watched all of it. Then she opened the door. She came out in her cardigan and her slippers on the cold, wet wood. She crouched down stiffly and picked up the glove. She set it in the center of the step, in the place he always put it, exactly as he would have. Caligo watched her do this. She straightened up and looked at him. He looked back at her with the specific directness that cats have, that unsettling sense they give of seeing not just your face, but through it, to something behind. She went back inside. She heard him leave a few minutes later. That night, she sat in the kitchen for a long time with both gloves on the table, the right and the left, side by side, the pair complete for the first time. She did not cry. She had done that already, mostly in the early months, in the dark before dawn, when the house was its most empty. What she felt now was something quieter, something that did not have an easy name. She put her hands over both gloves, palms down, the way you might rest your hands on a table when you are very tired and the room is warm and there is nothing more pressing than just being still. Then she went to bed, and in the morning she called her daughter in Portland for the first time since September. The third Tuesday of December came with the smell of snow before any snow fell. Edris knew the smell. It was different from rain and different from cold alone, a particular blankness in the air, a kind of held breath, as though the sky was about to say something and had not quite decided on the words. She was on the porch with her tea when the hour passed. 6:19 came and went. 6:30. 7. The street stayed quiet. A car moved slowly past. A woman with a stroller appeared at the far end of the block, moving efficiently, head down against the cold. Two crows sat on the wire above the garrety yard and discussed something at length. Caligo did not come. Edris stayed on the porch until the tea was cold. Then she went inside and washed the mug and stood at the kitchen window looking at the yard, at the dry stalks she had not yet cut back, at the empty pots along the fence. He did not come the following Tuesday either, or the one after that. The neighborhood offered its theories gently, in the way people do when they sense that a subject requires care. Maribel mentioned, with careful neutrality, that there had been an animal control vehicle on Clement Street. Dorothy Fisk, who lived at the end of the block and knew everything, said she had heard that the Grace Fellowship lot was to be cleared and fenced before the new year. Torren Vale said nothing at all, which from Torren was its own kind of statement. Edris listened to all of it and said very little. She noticed in those weeks the specific quality of his absence. Presence leaves a shape, even animal presence, even the presence of a stray who came once a week and never stayed more than half an hour. There was a shape on her Tuesday mornings now that had nothing in it. She was aware of it, the way you are aware of a chair that has been moved, not because you look at the space, but because your body expects the chair to be there and keeps finding air. She had not expected to miss him so specifically. She had not expected a great many things about the past several weeks. Her daughter Clara had called back within an hour of that September call, and they had talked for nearly 2 hours, a longer conversation than they had managed in the past year. Clara had said she was coming for Christmas, bringing her husband and the twins. News that arrived with its own complicated warmth, the twins being 7 now and full of the specific noise and motion of 7-year-olds, and the house being quiet in a way it was not built for. Edris had said she would put up the lights. She meant it. On the third Tuesday without Caligo, Edris put on her good coat. She had not fully decided where she was going when she began walking, but her feet took the path she already knew, through the alley behind the post office, past the cemetery service road, through the gravel strip and the gap in the fence. The cold was deep and dry, the kind that makes your nose ache and your eyes water, and somehow does not feel unfriendly, only honest. The Grace Fellowship lot was still untouched. She walked to the outbuilding. The door opened with only the lift of the latch, swinging inward on hinges that protested quietly. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. It was not dramatic inside. A folding table, some old tins, a length of cloth folded on a shelf, a worn mat on the dirt floor. the smell of rust and cold earth, the smell of something used and then left, but arranged. That was the right word. Everything set with a specific intention. The way Glenn arranged things. Horizontally, when most people would stack vertically. The tools hung at a consistent height, the cloth folded into a perfect square before being set down. She had teased him about it for years, about the impractical tidiness, about the way he could not set something down without squaring its edges to whatever surface it rested on. She stood in the space for a long time. Then she heard a sound, low, soft, very still, coming from the near corner, beneath the shelf where the cloth was folded. She crossed the small room and crouched down. Caligo looked up at her from beneath the lowest shelf, curled in the angle of the wall, his grey sides moving in the slow rhythm of something resting rather than something alert. He was thin in a way he had not been before. There was a quality to his stillness that was different from his usual composed quiet, a smallness in it, a retreat. He looked at her without moving. She stayed crouched, her knees complaining, her breath making a small cloud in the cold air. She did not try to reach for him. She simply reached into her coat pocket and took out the glove, the right-hand one, and set it on the dirt floor between them. Then she straightened up, slowly, and looked around the room once more. She went home. She came back the next morning with a shallow dish of water and a small container of food she had bought at the store the previous afternoon, standing in the pet aisle with the specific uncertainty of someone buying something for the first time and not entirely certain they're doing it correctly. She had also bought a small fleece blanket, folded in a plastic bag, in a color the tag described as warm oatmeal. She left everything near the shelf without comment. Maribel, when she was told, simply nodded. The festival planning committee, who had been discussing what to do about the lot before the new year, voted to defer the cleanup until spring. Torren Vale seconded the motion, which surprised no one who had been at the meeting with the glove. On the Friday of that week, Caligo came to Edris's porch, not on a Tuesday, not at dawn. In the middle of the afternoon, when the light was flat and the street was quiet, he climbed the steps and sat by the door without bringing anything. Edris, who had seen him from the kitchen window, went to the door and opened it. He looked at her. She looked at him. He walked, with great deliberateness, to the side of the porch where an old ceramic pot sat against the railing, empty and cold and dusty, one of a pair that had held geraniums years ago until she had stopped replanting them after the first spring on her own. He sat beside the pot. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. She did not understand immediately. She stood in the doorway, in the cold afternoon air, and watched him sit beside the empty pot with the focused patience of an animal who has decided to wait. Then she did understand. Glenn had kept geraniums too, on the ledge of the outbuilding, in a terracotta pot that caught the afternoon light. He had grown them from cuttings and referred to them in the third person, asking after their progress the way you might ask after a friend. She had thought it was one of his most endearing and slightly ridiculous qualities. She went back inside. She came out with a bag of potting soil and a small trowel, the newer trowel, not the old one that had been Glenn's, and she filled the pot on the porch with fresh, dark earth, working slowly and without ceremony, the soil cold and dense in her hands. She did not have geraniums in December. She would need to wait until spring. But the pot was full. Caligo watched her do this without moving from his spot. When she stood and brushed the soil from her hands and stepped back to look at what she had done, he regarded the pot for a long moment. Then he rose, stretched, and walked down the porch steps, with his tail held high. He paused at the bottom and looked back once. Then he went along the street in the direction of the elm and the old building and the hollow between the roots, at his own unhurried pace. In the weeks that followed, Caligo came more often, not always on Tuesdays, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes just before dark, when the streetlights came on one by one and the windows of the houses turned warm and amber against the blue evening. He no longer brought the glove. He simply came and sat and stayed for whatever time seemed right to him, and then went away again. The neighborhood changed in small ways around him. Maribel organized a small wooden box shelter for the side of the Grace Fellowship lot, cedar-lined with a waterproof lid, stocked with a blanket and checked weekly. Dorothy Fisk admitted over the garden fence one morning that she had always admired what Glenn Holden had done with the trite lauwverloos, wiens mee kutwaalse we krauwe, sounde, sasa, we and crows. Had never said so while she had the chance, which was the closest Dorothy had come to a direct admission of regret in Edris's experience of her, and felt significant. Torrenvale stopped by one afternoon with a set of tile tools, the kind Glenn had once owned, and left them with Edris without explanation, saying only that he had bought an extra set by accident and did not need the duplication. Edris kept them in the workroom. Clara arrived 4 days before Christmas with her husband and the twins, and the house filled up with the specific noise of grandchildren who were at the age of maximum volume and minimum indoor velocity. They discovered Caligo on the second morning, appearing on the porch as though he had organized himself around their visit, and spent an entire afternoon in negotiation with him over whether he would allow himself to be touched, which he eventually permitted on his own terms and schedule, in the way cats permit most things. The twins named him something unpronounceable that they explained at great length and that no adult fully retained. His name is Caligo, Edris told them, and this seemed acceptable. On Christmas morning, Edris filled the porch pot with white pebbles from the craft store, just for the season, as a placeholder. She stood looking at it in the cold morning light, the street silent except for the distant bells of the church on the hill. And she thought about things that end and things that do not end, and the particular grace of what continues, not as it was, but in some other form, some changed shape that still carries the original weight. She thought about the rust-colored thread. She thought about a glove being carried through a gap in a fence for weeks, with a consistency and care that most people could not manage, by an animal who had no particular reason to do it, and did it anyway. She thought about the pot, about earth, about what you put in the ground, with the reasonable hope that something will come of it, knowing the ground keeps it through the winter, knowing spring is not guaranteed but probable, knowing that the act of planting is itself something, even before anything grows. She was still standing on the porch when Caligo appeared at the end of the walk. He came up the steps without hurry, turned once at the top, and sat beside the pot with its white pebbles. He looked at her with that direct and particular attention. She looked back at him. The bells on the hill rang once more, and the flag at the Garrity house moved in a slow, cold breath of wind. Somewhere down the street, a door opened, and a voice called out something cheerful that carried without the words being clear. Edris put her hand out. Caligo leaned forward and pressed his head briefly against her palm. Then he settled where he was, beside the empty pot full of promise, and stayed. Some things do not come back as they were. They find another form. They arrive quietly, without announcement, carried in the mouth of a grey cat on a cold Tuesday morning, or folded into a length of rust-colored thread on the inside of a cuff, or pressed into dark soil in a pot on a winter porch. They arrive as a call returned after too long, as a door opened when standing still had become the hardest thing. They arrive as a neighbor sitting across a kitchen table in the afternoon while the tea cools and nothing much is said. They arrive as the particular patience of something that keeps coming back until you are ready. And when you are ready, finally, to step out onto the cold porch and set the thing down exactly where it belongs, some part of the world, some small and serious part of it, moves forward with you.